The people of Ireland have been carpet-bombed with debt. An IMF loan has been forced on them to pay off the government debts that were forced on them to pay off the bankers' debts. Most of the bankers have fled the country, but their bad debts continue to explode like financial roadside bombs across Ireland.
To get the loan, the Irish government has to slash spending. It's going to lay off almost 25,000 public sector workers, lower the minimum wage, increase taxes, and trim healthcare budgets.
And yes, it is a war, and the first people to actually suffer in war are women and children, and that's happened disgracefully in this budget with cuts in tax benefits for children and child benefit, and then also in terms of most of the women are lower paid workers, are on the minimum wage which has been cut. So all that lower end are mainly women, and mainly women by themselves with children. So it's mainly women and children that are absolutely being reefed out of it. And of course, in a war, it's always women and children. You rape the women and you kill off the children as quickly as you can.
Countries that have let the IMF come in and reshape their economies and their banking system have lived to regret it.
Yes, they have. In fact, the continent of the IMF are most aggressively involved in is Africa, and has been for the last 25 years. That in itself should send a sort of a warning sign to you. Most people seem to not realise that the International Monetary Fund is an orthodoxy. And it is driven by an orthodoxy, the very orthodoxy that's got us into this problem in the first place.
That orthodoxy? Debt.
What do you do? What's the IMF offering?
Nothing.
Debt, nothing,
Well,
occupation, colonialization.
Debt is their game. Debt is the banker's game. And if to keep the game going, they have to keep people in debt. Now, if you don't want to take on any debt, well, your bloody government will take it on for you.
Only a few years ago, the IMF was so broke it was selling off its alleged gold supply and looking for handouts.
And you mentioned also this idea that the money, where does it come from? And let's talk a little bit about that, because that's a problem all over the world. People are coming to the same conclusion. The global banking system suffers from a complete lack of understanding in terms of money, where it comes from and how it's used. Talk a little bit about that, Paul.
So all this debt that, like for example, the IMF is saying we're going to give you 85 billion euros. They don't have a room with 85 billion euros in it. It's just digital money backed by nothing. So it's an illusion, really. So Ireland is being saddled by our so-called leaders who are just working to an agenda, as far as we can see. We're being saddled with this unpayable debt. And when you look at what the IMF has done and the World Bank in similar situations, it's just called ruination everywhere.
There's a scuttlebutt on the street, let me say, that the IMF is in fact a desperate institution. They themselves, you could say, are bankrupt.
Well, it is what you could say. Actually, the IMF, as I believe the major creditor of the IMF is the United States, which is in itself a country that is printing money as if it's going out of fashion. But it's not so much that the IMF are bankrupt, Max, but it's that the EU and the IMF have to borrow the money to lend to us. Now the question is, who's the EU borrowing the money from? It's borrowing the money from the very investment banks that we are bailing out with that new money. So the banks win twice. On the one hand, they get bailed out for their stupidity of lending to our banks. On the other hand, we are paying them interest to bail them out. So it's a heist.
The IMF is talking about taking the state electrical company. They're talking about seizing the pensions. They're talking about seizing the oil. They're basically doing a hostile takeover. It's a war zone. And they're using debt as a weapon. And the property and the wealth is being confiscated from the Irish people. And yet here they are racking up more of their credit card debt, and they're not fighting back. And down in Greece, they say, when they're protesting on the street, we're not Irish, meaning we don't take it like the Irish people do. We're actually fighting. What happened to the Irish? How come they became so docile? Is it something in the water?
I think they're all watching the X Factor.
So it's just
they're all still comfortable. I don't think they're actually squeezed yet.
So let me get this straight. The IMF is raising money, borrowing money to do what could be called a hostile raid of Ireland, and they're putting up Ireland's own assets, including possibly their national electric company, as the collateral to borrow the money to do the hostile raid of Ireland.
To pay off banks that made tragically, comically poor investment decisions.
And to square the circle, the government is asking the people to...
It's asking me
to
pay
suffer
for this.
austerity.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the theater of the absurd.
The last theater to be so absurd was the court of Louis XVI and his wife, Marie Antoinette.
It's not going to change without out-and-out revolution. Out-and-out revolution. I can't see no other way for the change that we need to come about to happen without revolution, and that's messy. That's very messy.
Thousands of demonstrators poured.
That's a recurring question that comes up over and over again. Why does it seem as though people are so docile in the face of this obvious attack? And it's a financial attack. Is it because the mechanism of the attack is unknown? It's a financial attack. It's not an obvious attack. But any thoughts on this from anybody? Yes, in the back. Sir.
I've been in Ireland for 3 years now, and I think the reason why there hasn't been, or the reaction has been very lackluster, is it hasn't really hit yet. In the paper today, they kind of broke down the budget for next year, and it kind of gave you, I should have brought the paper in, but it gave you, exactly how much money you're going to have to pay in taxes next year versus what you'd pay this year. For a single person, family of four, so on and so forth. So I think once the reality hits that, okay, it's not just, the government, backing up the banks, but it's actually the people backing up the government, backing up the banks, and they're going to see an increase in taxes, that's when hopefully the emotion will come out and the concern will come out, and it won't be something that you talk about around, the water cooler at work, but, something that people actually take to action.
Now that it's in people's faces and it's being obvious that there's something strange going on here, people are more open to it. So there is a big awakening, yeah. So we're hopeful that this country won't be finished by the IMF. If we give away our sovereignty, it's the end of the story, You've got a big, massive juggernaut in the EU, which was supposed to be a free trade agreement. What is it now? It's a super state. And if we get into that, and we're in debt to these people, we're never going to get out of it, So this is the crunch time for Ireland. Ireland is also the first one, more or less, in this really drastic situation in Europe. So what we do is going to be watched by the rest. So it's for the benefit of all the people in Europe. We need to take a stand and go, no way, this is a scam, it's criminal behaviour, and we have to stop it, if possible.
Markets realise, like any rational person, in the face of a receivership, which we are going into, the receiver has got to do two things. He's got to make sure the company can breathe in the future, if you want to keep it alive. And to do that, he's got to do a debt forgiveness deal with creditors. They have got to pay. That is very simple. There's no other way out of this. And all we're doing now is postponing the problem, because what we're doing, Max, is we're borrowing from tomorrow to pay for yesterday, and in so doing, forgetting about today. It's lunacy.
It's true the real estate market had a huge run, and a lot of people had paper wealth for a few years, and they felt really rich. But it was illusory, and that wealth is now gone, and the value of those homes are not coming back. If you don't understand that, but everyone in this room, I think, understands that. These home prices are not coming back. They're not coming back this decade or the next decade. Those home prices are permanently underwater. There's going to have to be a massive write-off on these banks to the 300-400 billion euro scale, and it's putting this country into a situation of permanent indebtedness to folks like the IMF. The time to act is now or forever hold your peace.
Haline nur legaun is to magraden dood is seated as the hound is the flashes. Likewise your features round excel the lady brown. Your equal can't be found in smartshire. If I had 1,000